a lot about in DePIN, the fine line between supply and demand. And I think it counts for both like the product itself and also the token. So I think introducing the panel first, I have Scott from CoinList here. I think everybody knows about CoinList. They've been OGs in the space. And then we have Amit as well. Maybe we could do like a small round of introductions on about yourself and also what you guys do at like CoinList and Borderless.
Sure. So hey guys, I'm Amit from Borderless. I'm one of the partners in the fund. We have like over 300 companies in the portfolio now, managing like around $500 million AUM. We have 2 active funds which are deploying. One is focused on interoperability cross-chain. One is focused on DePIN. We are almost done with our DePIN Fund 2, launching a new DePIN Fund 3. We were investing in DePIN right from, before the even category was called DePIN. It used to be called HFI. And, then Masari came up with the term DePIN and the whole industry converged. So we started with a Helium staking and mining fund. Then from there did like Poland, Demo, HiveMapper, GeoNet, like all of the key, like bunch of the key portfolio, the DePIN projects are in our portco. And, proud of that. And we are launching DePIN Fund 3 now. So glad to be here.
And I'm Scott from CoinList. If you're not familiar with CoinList, we are the premier launch platform. We've been around since 2017. We've done 1.1 billion in funding across about 52 projects, starting with Filecoin was the first one, Solana near many layer ones. More recently, we've done Peak. They raised 20 million on CoinList. And then after that, Nadix. So we've been active in DePIN, again, to the extent that DePIN existed as a category in 2017, it really didn't. I think I bought 2 Helium miners personally because I really like what they were building. But DePIN's very exciting.
Thank you so much. Maybe we could start like with the question, the fine line between supply. Sorry, the fine line between supply and demand, right? But when we've looked at a lot of these early to like the early token projects in DePIN, the line between supply and demand isn't so fine. So we've seen that the token's been really useful to bootstrap like a great supply. But which projects do you think are closest to solving like the demand side, balancing out like the token incentives on the supply side?
Do you want to speak to your portfolio?
So yeah, I think it's a very good question. I think to some extent, basically supply, at least when we are looking at DePIN projects, is almost like a given. If a project doesn't have supply, to be very candid, I mean, it's not even, it's not even a project like where we would seriously look at it. That's like a given. For a lot of projects, I think what is critical is having the demand side. Now, we came up with this DePIN Thesis 2.0, where we divided DePIN into 2 categories. One is like bespoke DePIN, so where you need to have specific hardware. So stuff like HiveMapper, stuff like GeoNet. I run like a GeoNet, kind of. I have the antenna, I run it. So where you need to have specific hardware, and then commodity DePIN where you just need your smartphone and you can start earning, you can start contributing to the network. And I think some companies, generally all the companies that we invest in, one of the things we looked at is how they are tackling the demand size, what the go-to market. Of course, if we are coming in the pre-seed seed stage, generally that is something where they are yet to fully crack it, but they at least have a very good idea of how they are going to approach it, what the go-to market is going to be. So speaking to the portfolio, maybe I'll take an example of GeoNet. So basically help improve accuracy of satellite data. So satellite data today is around a meter, kind of accurate. With GeoNet, they decentralize it, and using that power, you can get up to a centimeter level of accuracy in your GPS. And so using that, the demand that they're trying to crack is, they are cracking is all the use cases for precision location data, like agriculture, precision agriculture, precision data requirements for even for point-to-point transport and so on. But that is just one example. Another example is Natix, for example. We are very proud of them as well. So I think demand is something which is very crucial for DePIN founders to have, as they become serious about go-to-market. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree with Amit that supply is kind of a given. We've proven out that you can reward users with tokens and get them to bootstrap a network in some capacity. I think I would argue that there's no DePIN project today that has really solved for demand. And so if you're looking at early stage projects or even projects that are close to having or have launched a token and have some of the supply network effects going, you're really trying to figure out, what are they doing or what have they figured out? Do they have the team? Do they have the capacity? Do they have the business development side of their business able to figure out what that is? I mean, every DePIN network is going to be different in some meaningful capacity, but the demand side is the much harder part to figure out. And so if you're looking, at Natix or whatever, you're saying, do these people have the background? Do they even understand what the customer segment that they're targeting is? If you're selling, location data, car data, whatever is demo, usage data, there's a lot of things that they're going to have to figure out. And it's an early stage startup, realistically. And they're using the token to kind of bootstrap one part of the network, which is traditionally hard to get. But then later on, hopefully they're going to figure out how to sell that data or whatever the service is into that end consumer. And I don't think we've really solved it or anyone's really solved it. Even long-standing ones like Helium, they've pivoted to being a mobile network and they're getting some demand. Now it's a consumer product that's totally different from the original idea was. And not to say the original idea was bad, but it required a little bit of pivoting to figure that out.
No, I completely agree with what the both of you said, but maybe a follow-on question. Do you think we've seen a lot of DePIN projects kind of lose traction, lose momentum because of maybe the cyclic nature of crypto? Do you think crypto cycles are too short to bootstrap that demand side, especially for something like an enterprise use case, like what a Hive Mapper or a GeoNet is looking at? What do you think solves this issue? A question to both of you, actually.
I think a little bit is the token price cycle is very aggressive in terms of its hype. That doesn't mean you can't solve for an enterprise level solution or a 10-year time horizon type of problem. But I think you have to recognize that the token price on any given day is not reflective of whatever you're doing. Again, I'll go back to Helium as an example. Famously, all the data usage on the network in 2021 was people buying Helium nodes and setting them up, and the token price went up. They continue to build and continue to innovate and do different things. So I don't think it's impossible given the token price kind of world. But I would think about the token as in some ways you get free money, for lack of a better word, that you can bring forward into the future to pay out incentives. That you don't have to have that cash. You don't need $100 million on hand to go build out the network. So you're bringing that forward. Hopefully it'll be valuable later. But the supply the price is going to fluctuate in the crypto cycle. The question is building through it and building something of value.
I agree with Scott. I think to some extent, the whole use of token is to bootstrap the network, to kickstart the network. And I think kind of magic happens when somehow the token cycle matches with for a project when they are doing go-to-market and trying to generate the demand. And if those two happens to collide, and happen to match, I think that's where the real magic happens. But I think to a large extent, demand is something which the founders, they can help use tokens to bootstrap the demand, but they really have to crack that GTM to generate the demand.
And I think just also a lot of DePIN projects, companies are going to have equity value in their business beyond the token. And I think that's not necessarily true of, say, a DeFi project. But if you're building something, especially like a Web 2.5 DePIN, there's value that's accrued to the token based on network usage, but also you're a builder on that network as well, and you're selling to enterprise customers. There's going to be some equity value too left over that I think hasn't necessarily materialized in exits, but I think that's a big part of DePIN. That's not necessarily true of all their token networks. So while the public price of your token is going to be out there in the world, it's not the only thing that matters in this type of ecosystem, at least my opinion.
No, completely agree with you. And I think Amit mentioned something very important, which is the timing of these projects. And maybe a question for you, Amit, because you folks have a dedicated DePIN fund. How do you think founders should time when to launch the token or when to start building a project as, let's, assuming a 4-year crypto cycle? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I think, so generally the way we do it is there's a whole capital market strategy to the token side. Now, building on what I think Scott was sharing earlier, there are some projects where, so for most of the projects when we come in early, we generally, have like, we generally have an agreement with where we have exposure to both equity and token side, because to that point we don't know value accrual where it will happen that early in the game. There are some projects where there is a separate value accrual on equity, separate on the token side. For a lot of them, most of the value accrual, kind of happens on the token side. And if that is the case, in terms of timing, there it becomes a pure capital market play. Like how many where we are in the macro environment in the Web3 space. What will be a good time to go and talk to market makers, talk to CoinList, talk to a kind of other centralized exchanges, and how again that can maybe tie to some key announcements that the project is doing. If they can tie the token launch to some key milestones on the fundraise side, on the business side, I think that's where the real magic happens. So we try our best. Sometimes it's a mix of business plus markets, but on the token side especially, a lot of it is driven by capital markets, how the state of the market is and so on.
So to sum it up, when a founder is thinking of launching their token, they really need to be mindful of which part of the cycle that they are in. Is it okay to be launching a token now? And a lot of these external factors come into the timing game of the token. Okay.
I actually don't 100% agree. I think you have a lot of flexibility in terms of like when you want to launch the token, especially if the token has a real application, like what you're doing matters. Like you can't launch when you have nothing. But if you try to time the market perfectly, you may not succeed. And a lot of like organic growth, community growth happens, unfortunately because the price goes up. Like the narrative follows the price movement. And so if, you're accruing value and there's stuff being built over time, you may have more success than saying, we're going to launch right at this exact moment when the token price will be the highest, because what's most likely to happen in some type of cycle is that the price will go down and you may lose some of that momentum. So I agree with like timing, time matter, but if you perfectly try to time the market, you may not achieve the results that you're looking for. You may be better off building in public, trying to accrue value to the token, trying to accrue value to the network overall over, a slightly longer time horizon than a, 1 month period in the middle of this, summer in July in ECC or whatever.
Oh, completely agree. And I also think it kind of depends on what the demand feedback loop for that particular project is. Maybe something like a Hive Mapper has a much longer feedback loop since it's looking at enterprise plays, but maybe something like a Helium has a shorter feedback cycle. But yeah, completely agree with that. And on the note of like launching a token, have you observed any best practices, any nuances that founders should think of when they are launching a token? Because you've done, I think, some of the best DePIN token launches out there, starting with Filecoin all the way to Peak Network very recently. So any nuances that you wanted to?
I mean, I think the first thing I would think about, which is hopefully very obvious to everyone, like Demo, I love that project, love the founder. Their network supply side is really dependent on US, and we don't serve the US. So if you're focused on US market, as like getting people to install devices in their car and for insurance tracking, all these different things, like think about where your actual end user customer is when you're going to go to market. Love the project, but we don't serve US customers, so wouldn't have been a good fit. And then in terms of other successful stories, I think unlike 2018, 19, 20, I think, you kind of have to set up this, exchange liquidity profile for your token. So you can't necessarily get away with maybe what Helium did and in the early days, which was just sell a bunch of devices, not have that token traded anywhere. I think you'll get a lot of feedback, negative feedback from, the supply side of that. So setting that up is quite important. But I think it's figuring out what your end customer is probably the most important thing. Like traders, people who will provide liquidity and buy your token as a speculative investment vehicle, that's great, but they're not the core consumer towards like a 10-year horizon of like who's using this network on the supply side. So I think about those people, how to find them, and there's tons of different ways to do that, but how do you get those people on board?
Interesting.
Just to add to that on the token side, like some of the things we cover with the founders is, which chain to launch on. For example, for a lot of projects like Solana, kind of right now is the de facto chain to launch. Along with that, how they can work with protocols like Wormhole, maybe to go cross-chain, natively launch their token in multiple chains. What should be the distribution for community investors? What should be the lock-in period? How should the unlocks happen and so on? So all those like the pure play tokenomics, but I think those along with I think what Scott said, they complete the whole picture.
Absolutely, and I think that's a perfect segue to my next question for you, Amit, because Borderless has invested in Peak, and there are also some other alternate L1s that want to become the de facto chain for DePIN. How do you think this affects like the supply and demand side for a DePIN project, and why would a DePIN project want to launch on a chain like this when there's something like a Solana or any dynamics that you see on like a supply and demand side?
No, I think great question. So we are, by the way, very close to Peak, very bullish about them. Love the founders there. I think what happens is DePIN is a lot about network and community and users. There are certain chains, for example, like Peak, Solana, where there are synergies, natural synergies in you as a DePIN founder launching your token in that chain, because the community in that particular ecosystem understands what DePIN is, understands how the process works. They already have wallets. They can easily and the community cross pollinates. Again, it's a small community that cross pollinates. So that I think is the bigger play where coming to the demand side it becomes easier. And one of the good practices which I think we are seeing with some of the projects is not just restricting to one chain, but actually being multi-chain. So, launching natively on Peak as well as Solana and a few other chains. I think that's how they get the most of the pie.
Interesting. And do you see a future where, like you spoke about the community cross-pollinating. For example, GeoDNet and maybe something like a Proto will have very similar communities, and including a Hive Mapper. But then something like a Demo and 3 others will have a very different kind of community. So do you see them all being composable on like the same chain, or like how are you looking at that community?
And cross-pollination is something which we actually encourage. So not just on the chain piece, I think, for example, we are actively encouraging and working, our portcos working together. So like Natix working with Silencio, similarly Demo working with Silencio on the tracking piece, getting listed on Silencio, getting listed on the Demo marketplace and so on. Then coming to the chain piece, it's more of a kind of a decision of where they see the community resides, how they can get the most of the community. But I think in terms of the projects working with each other, we definitely encourage that. And I've seen, and I think the community is very supportive and collaborative. Like these founders, they really love to work with each other and support each other.
I think on like maybe chain selection, there's like a technical component, which I won't speak to. I think all the founders should make their own decisions on that. But there's also a really big problem in crypto, not specific to DePIN, which is a distribution problem. And this happens, you mentioned kind of an app store and stuff like that. That doesn't really exist with massive consumer usage right now. And so I think a lot of the chain selection is like, how do I achieve distribution among a subset of users? And one of those channels is embedding yourself within one like larger ecosystem, say Solana or potentially Peak in the future, and saying that's one way that we're going to try to get distribution is like an awareness is by jumping into this ecosystem. So I do think it's probably harder from like a distribution perspective to jump into some totally new ecosystem, because those people won't be aware of DePIN or may not have the users. And this applies to all projects, but I do think that's a big component of why teams have chosen Solana probably more than anything else as of late.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much for that, Amit. Thank you, Scott. I think we're up on time. Thank you so much. That was a super insightful discussion. But yeah, would love to pick your brain more on these. And I don't know, in case founders want to reach out to CoinList or Borderless, where do you think is the best place to reach out to you folks?
I guess, yeah, you can find me on Telegram, JSK251, or Twitter at Keto.
And I'll be around here, so happy to connect.
Yeah, I'll be around as well, but if you need to find me later.
All right. Thank you so much for the panel, Amit, Scott. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.